Your stuff's in the garage. This isn't your house anymore, my sister declared. This contract is ironclad, my lawyer said firmly. 2 days later, I sent them eviction. I'm 27. I live in my grandmother's old house in the suburbs. The house, though not new or extravagant, held sentimental value. It had been passed down to me after my grandmother's death. She had always been kind and made sure I had everything I needed. I had built a stable life for myself, a good job in marketing that I'd worked hard to secure, my own place that was fully paid off thanks to my grandmother's prudent financial planning and what I believed was a supportive family network. There was my mom, who had remarried when I was young to my stepdad, and my younger half-sister Janet, who was always the apple of their eye. They lived in a more modern house closer to the city, though they were still struggling with a substantial mortgage that seemed to weigh heavily on their discussions during family gatherings. The day everything began to unravel started like any other Sunday afternoon. My mom came over for our weekly coffee catch-up, a tradition we'd maintained since I moved into the house. Mom seemed distracted, stirring her coffee longer than necessary, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "Leslie, honey, can we talk?" she finally said, setting down her spoon with a soft clink. That's when she unveiled her proposal, a house swap. She and Tom had been discussing moving into my grandmother's house, drawn to its quiet location and the spacious garden they'd always dreamed of having. In exchange, I could move into their city home, which was admittedly larger and significantly closer to my office. "You'd be saving so much time on your commute," she emphasized, leaning forward with an earnestness that should have set off warning bells. "The house is so much more modern, perfect for someone your age. Plus, your stepdad and I have always wanted to live here. It would mean so much to us." When I raised concerns about the legal aspects of such an arrangement, she dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "We're family, Leslie. No need for lawyers or complicated paperwork." Looking back, I should have recognized the red flag in her reluctance to formalize the arrangement. But then she dropped another bombshell that made me pause. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice taking on that sweet tone she often used when asking for favors, "since this house is still paid off and you have such a stable job, could you take over our mortgage payments? I'm sure you'll be fine handling it." Something in her too casual tone made me hesitate. Years of watching Janet get preferential treatment had taught me to be cautious. "I'll need everything in writing," I said firmly, surprising myself with my assertiveness. "If I'm going to take over mortgage payments, I want a contract stating that if anything goes wrong, the house transfers to my name since I'm the one paying for it." My mother's face flickered with something, annoyance, concern, before smoothing back into a smile. "Of course, sweetie, whatever makes you comfortable." The next day, I hired a lawyer to draft a proper contract. My parents seemed annoyed by my insistence on legal documentation, but their desire to move into my grandmother's house quickly overshadowed their reservations. They signed the contract without even reading it thoroughly, a fact that would prove crucial later. For 4 years, I poured my heart and soul into making their house my home. I didn't just pay the mortgage, I transformed the space entirely. I installed new energy-efficient appliances, renovated the outdated kitchen with my own savings, and gave several rooms complete makeovers. Every month, I sent more than the required mortgage payment, determined to pay it off ahead of schedule. I was building my future, or so I thought. The night everything fell apart is seared into my memory. I had just returned from a 2-week business trip, exhausted from endless meetings and presentations. I walked up to what I thought was still my house. The porch light was on, strange since I always turned it off before leaving, and I could hear laughter and music from inside. My key wouldn't turn in the lock. I tried again and again, the frustration mounting as I realized the locks had been changed. Just as I was pulling out my phone to call a locksmith, the door swung open and there stood Janet, my younger sister, wearing my favorite pair of slippers, the ones our grandmother had given me before she passed. Behind her, I could see her new husband sprawled on my couch, the one I'd saved for months to buy, playing video games on my TV. The house I'd spent years making my own had been invaded. "Your stuff's in the garage," Janet said dismissively, as if she were telling a door-to-door salesperson to leave. "You should probably take it soon, we need the space." I stood there, rooted to the spot, my suitcase still in hand. The reality of what was happening crashed over me in waves. What do you mean? This is my house. I've been paying the mortgage for years. Janet's laugh was cold, nothing like the sister I'd grown up with. Not anymore. Mom and Dad gave it to us as a wedding present. We're living here now. You should be happy for us. It's our first home together. The betrayal cut deep, but it was about to get worse. When I drove to my parents' house, my grandmother's house, to confront them, they wouldn't even open the door. Through the solid wood, my mother's voice came muffled but clear. "Go away, Leslie. This isn't your house anymore either." Standing there on the porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings with my grandmother, I felt my world crumbling. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, had been stripped away in an instant. But as the shock began to fade, another emotion took its place: determination. I still had that contract, the one they'd signed so carelessly 4 years ago. They might have forgotten about it, but I hadn't. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Update 1. The morning after discovering my family's betrayal, I barely slept. I spent the night in a hotel, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge and justice. By 7 a.m., I was already searching for lawyers specializing in property law. I needed someone who wouldn't be swayed by family drama, someone who would see this situation for what it was: theft, plain and simple. That's how I found Mr. Thompson. His firm had a reputation for handling complex property disputes, and his no-nonsense approach was exactly what I needed. When I called his office, his secretary initially said he couldn't see me for 2 weeks. But after I briefly explained my situation, she put me on hold and came back with an appointment for that afternoon. Walking into his office, I was struck by how different it felt from the chaos of the past 24 hours. Mr. Thompson listened intently as I laid out my story. I handed him the contract my parents had signed 4 years ago, along with proof of every mortgage payment I'd made. "Let me be clear," he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he examined the documents. "You've been making payments on a house that your parents just gave away to your sister, and they've also taken back the house that was legally left to you by your grandmother." "Yes," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "They didn't even warn me. I came home from a business trip to find my sister living in my house, and they won't let me back into my grandmother's house either." Mr. Thompson's expression darkened as he reviewed the contract. "This is actually quite straightforward," he said, sounding almost surprised. "This contract is ironclad. You've not only been making payments, but you've also been paying above the required amount. According to these bank statements, you've actually paid off the entire mortgage as of last month." My heart skipped a beat. In my anger and confusion, I'd almost forgotten about that final payment. I'd been so proud of myself for paying off the mortgage early, planning to surprise my parents with the news when I returned from my business trip. The irony was bitter. "What's more," Mr. Thompson continued, "this contract clearly states that upon completion of the mortgage payments, the house transfers fully to your name. Your parents signed this. There's no ambiguity here." He leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. "As for your grandmother's house, do you have the original deed?" I nodded, pulling out another folder. I'd kept all my grandmother's paperwork meticulously organized, something she'd taught me to do. "There was never any legal transfer of ownership," I explained. "They just moved in." Mr. Thompson spent the next hour outlining our strategy. We would file for immediate eviction notices for both properties, backed by the contract and deed. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," he assured me. "This isn't a complex case of property law, it's a clear violation of legal ownership rights." Within 2 days, Mr. Thompson had prepared all the necessary documentation. We decided to serve the eviction notices simultaneously at both properties to prevent my family from trying to coordinate their responses. I insisted on being present. I wanted them to see that I wasn't backing down. We went to my house first, where Janet and her husband were still living. The look of shock on their faces when they saw me standing there with a lawyer was almost satisfying. Janet tried to slam the door in our faces, but Mr. Thompson smoothly blocked it with his foot. "I am serving you with an eviction notice," he announced professionally. You have 3 days to vacate the premises. This property legally belongs to Miss Leslie and your current occupation is unlawful. Janet's husband started to protest, but Mr. Thompson cut him off. I suggest you contact your own legal representation if you wish to dispute this. However, I should warn you that we have extensive documentation proving the ownership, including proof of mortgage payments and a signed contract. From there, we drove to my grandmother's house. My parents were home, their car was in the driveway. When they opened the door and saw us, my mother's face went pale. My stepdad, however, turned red with anger. "You can't do this," he sputtered, trying to intimidate us with his size as he stood in the doorway. "This is our house now, we had an agreement." "And verbal agreement is not legally binding," Mr. Thompson replied calmly, "especially when it contradicts existing legal documentation. This property was left to Ms. Leslie by her grandmother and there has been no legal transfer of ownership. You are currently occupying this property without legal right." My mother tried a different approach, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. "Leslie, honey, we're your parents. You can't just throw us out on the street. What will people think?" I had prepared myself for this moment, for their attempts to guilt me. "You should have thought about that before you tried to steal both my homes," I replied, my voice steady. "You have 3 days to leave both properties." My stepdad's face contorted with rage. "We'll fight this, we'll get our own lawyers." Mr. Thompson remained unruffled. "You're welcome to do so. However, I should inform you that we have already filed paperwork with the county clerk's office. Any legal challenge you mount will be expensive and, given the documentation we have, ultimately futile. I suggest you use these 3 days to find new accommodation rather than waste money on a legal battle you cannot win." The next 3 days were tense. My parents tried everything. They called mutual friends to pressure me, they attempted to negotiate through intermediaries, they even tried to claim that my grandmother had promised them the house verbally before she died. None of it worked. Mr. Thompson had advised me to document everything. I took photos of both properties before and after they moved out, anticipating potential damage. I changed the locks immediately after they left, with a locksmith present to witness and document the change. When the 3 days were up, my family had no choice but to leave. They'd hired a lawyer of their own, but one looked at our documentation and he advised them to comply with the eviction. They moved out quietly, leaving both houses in disarray, clothes strewn about, furniture damaged, walls scuffed. It was their final act of petty revenge. The cleanup took weeks. Both houses needed repairs from their careless occupation. In my house, Janet had managed to scratch all the hardwood floors I'd so carefully maintained. In my grandmother's house, they'd painted over the vintage wallpaper I'd preserved, knowing how much it meant to me. But beneath the damage and chaos, something important had shifted. I was no longer the compliant daughter they could manipulate. I had stood up for myself, fought back, and won. Mr. Thompson helped me file additional claims for the damage they'd caused, and though the money wasn't significant, it was another victory. More importantly, he helped me secure restraining orders when my parents started showing up unannounced, trying to guilt me into letting them return. "You need to protect yourself," he advised. "Family or not, they've shown they can't be trusted with your property or your boundaries." The legal proceedings didn't end there. My parents, in a desperate move, tried to claim that I had coerced them into signing the original contract. The judge dismissed their case in less than an hour, ordering them to pay my legal fees as a penalty for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Update 2. I appreciate all the support and advice I've received. While I know I did the right thing by standing up for myself, the story didn't end with the legal victory. The aftermath with my family was messy and painful in ways I never expected. When my parents and Janet realized they couldn't touch my properties anymore, they changed tactics, launching a campaign of emotional manipulation that tested my resolve in ways the legal battle hadn't. The calls started flooding in about a month after the eviction. My parents, it turned out, had drained their savings trying to furnish and renovate my grandmother's house, assuming they'd never have to leave. Janet and her husband had spent their wedding money on new furniture for my house, certain that their theft would go unchallenged. Now they were all scrambling to find a place to live, and their financial situation was dire. My mother's calls were the worst. She would alternate between hysterical crying and vicious accusations. "Where are we supposed to live now?" she would wail. "You're throwing your own family out on the street. You're such a heartless brat." When I didn't respond the way she wanted, she'd switch to threats. "Everyone will know what kind of daughter you really are. Nobody will ever look at you the same way again." She was right about one thing. People did look at me differently, but not in the way she'd hoped. My parents had gone on a smear campaign telling anyone who would listen about their ungrateful daughter who had stolen their homes. They conveniently left out the part about their own theft, about the years I'd spent paying their mortgage, about the legal documents proving my ownership. The calls came from everywhere: family, friends, church members, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had been fed the same distorted version of events. "How could you do this to your own parents?" they'd ask. "They gave you everything, and this is how you repay them." I blocked number after number, but they found new ways to reach me. They would show up at my workplace, causing scenes in the lobby. My mother once cornered me in the grocery store, crying loudly about how I'd made them homeless, trying to embarrass me in front of other shoppers. Janet took to social media, posting long, dramatic stories about how I'd ruined her marriage by taking away their first home. The financial reality of their situation became clearer as time went on. My parents had not only spent all their savings, but had also taken out additional loans against my grandmother's house, loans they couldn't legally secure since they didn't own the property. Janet and her husband had maxed out credit cards buying furniture and appliances for my house, assuming they'd have years to pay it off. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps compassion, I offered them a solution. They could rent my house, paying me back the equivalent of the mortgage payments I'd made over the 4 years. It was more than fair. They'd get a place to live, and I'd recover some of what they'd taken from me. Their response showed me exactly who they were. My mother laughed bitterly. "So now you want to be our landlord, to lord it over us even more? You're just like your grandmother, always thinking you're better than everyone else." That comment about my grandmother, the woman who had loved and protected me, who had worked hard to leave me a home free and clear, was the final straw. I realized something profound in that moment. I had spent years trying to earn their love and respect through sacrifice and generosity, but none of it had mattered. They saw my kindness as weakness, my generosity as an obligation. The harassment continued for months. They would drive by my house late at night, honking their horns. They tried to convince my tenants in my grandmother's house to break their lease, telling them lies about the property's condition. They even attempted to file complaints with my homeowner's insurance, claiming the house was unsafe. But each attempt at sabotage only strengthened my resolve. I documented everything: every harassing call, every social media post, every attempted interference. Mr. Thompson helped me file for restraining orders when their behavior became too aggressive. The courts granted them, and suddenly my family's ability to harass me was legally curtailed. Watching them deal with the consequences of their actions was both satisfying and sad. They had to downsize significantly, moving into a small apartment in a less desirable area. Janet's marriage became strained under the financial pressure, and she and her husband separated temporarily. My parents had to sell their cars and take public transportation. The lifestyle they'd maintained through manipulation and theft was crumbling. Yet even in their struggles, they never once acknowledged their role in creating this situation. They never apologized for trying to steal my homes, for taking advantage of my generosity, for betraying my trust. In their minds, they were the victims, and I was the villain who had ruined their lives. I rebuilt my life on my own terms. I renovated both houses, erasing the damage they'd done. I built new friendships with people who respected boundaries and understood loyalty. I focused on my career, earning a promotion that allowed me to start investing in more properties, this time with proper legal protection from the start. Most importantly, I learned to value myself. I realized that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, trust, and mutual support. My parents and sister had shown me who they really were, and while it hurt to accept that truth, it also freed me from the obligation to keep trying to win their love. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to take everything from me, they had actually given me something invaluable: the strength to stand up for myself and the wisdom to know when to let go. I wasn't just taking back my houses, I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my right to be treated with respect.